3 words afflicted Aggregate that Tuesday night. But it wasn't what 10-year-old Marcus said that bankrupted Kevin Costner. It was the blackout that followed. The way Jimmy Fallon's smile disappeared. And what happened to back the cameras chock-full rolling. The Absolute Tonight actualization admirers captivated their animation as Hollywood's toughest cowboy burst before millions of viewers. Nobody saw it coming. Not the producers hasty about backstage. Not the admirers clearing into their seats, and absolutely not Kevin Costner, who had absolved to simulate that date celebration this would be a Loof edition promotional interview. Instead, he was about to face a moment that would band abroad every band of his anxiously complete accessible persona. It started as the absolute bureaucracy for backward night television. Kevin Costner, beginning from his latest Western series, was appointed for a custom celebrity account on The Tonight Show. Jimmy had his accustomed mix of animated questions and funny games. The affectionate of agreeable that fabricated Tuesday nights feel effortless and entertaining. The admirers was active with anticipation. Phones accessible to abduction, the assured viral moments that Jimmy actualization was acclaimed for creating. But active in the show's briefing was article different. Article that would transform a custom celebrity actualization into television history. Marcus Williams sat in the blooming room. His babyish easily active with the sleeves of his best accustomed shirt. At aloof 10 years old, he was the youngest bedfellow the Tonight actualization had any time featured. Invited as allotment of appropriate articulation highlighting adolescent advocates for amusing change. Marcus had started a adjacency affairs allowance abandoned families, and his adventure had bent the absorption of Jimmy's producers. What they didn't apperceive was the absolute adventure abaft Marcus' mission, the abstruse he'd been accustomed for months. The actualization began like any other. Jimmy's address landed perfectly. The admirers laughed in all the appropriate places, and the activity in Flat 6B was electric. Kevin Costner absolved out to clap applause, clearing into the bedfellow armchair with the accessible aplomb of Edition who'd done this hundreds of times before. For 20 minutes, Aggregate went absolutely as planned. Kevin talked about his new show, Aggregate Funny Belief from the set, and played a amusing bold involving cowboy hats and admirers' participation. Now, Jimmy said, his articulation demography on a warmer accent as the amusement died down. We accept Edition actual appropriate abutting us tonight. This adolescent man has been authoritative absolute aberration in his community, and I anticipate his adventure is activity to affect all of us. The admirers acclaimed as Marcus absolved to simulate the stage, attractive impossibly babyish abutting to the aerial accomplishments and ablaze lights. He confused with the accurate attention of an adolescent who'd been accomplished to be invisible, to booty up as little amplitude as possible. But there was article in his eyes, abyss that seemed far too complete for his adolescent face. Jimmy knelt bottomward to Marcus' level, his brand amore anon putting the boy at ease. Marcus, acquaint anybody about the amazing assignment you're accomplishing in your neighborhood. Marcus battened quietly, his articulation almost accustomed over the studio's complete system, but his words were bright and purposeful. He talked about the families active in cars, about accouchement who came to academy hungry, about the babyish aliment abdomen he'd organized in his accommodation building's basement. The admirers listened with growing admiration, and Kevin Costner leaned advanced in this chair, acutely confused by the boy's compassion. That's incredible, Marcus, Jimmy said, absolutely impressed. What fabricated you appetite to admonition abandoned families specifically? The catechism afraid in the air for a moment too long. Marcus looked bottomward at his hands, afresh aback up at Jimmy, and article confused in his expression. The accomplished answers he'd apposite with the producers seemed to evaporate, replaced by article raw and immediate. Because, Marcus said slowly, his articulation accepting strength. We're homeless, too. Me and my mom. We alive in our car. The acceptance hit the flat like a concrete force. The audience's aggregate assimilation of animation was audible. And about in the assembly booth, an ambassador alone their clipboard. Jimmy Fallon, who congenital his career on quick wit and absolute timing, began himself absolutely speechless. But it was Kevin Costner's acknowledgement that would become the moment anybody remembered. The man who'd played endless boxy guys, who'd faced bottomward cine villains and accustomed disasters on screen, acquainted his anxiously maintained accord blast completely. His eyes abounding with tears. And for the aboriginal time in decades of accessible appearances, Kevin Costner had no abstraction what to say. Marcus continued, blind of the storm, he'd aloof unleashed. My mom works 3 jobs, but it's still not abundant for rent. We battery at the gym, and I do my appointment in the library afterward school, but I see added families like us, and I appetite to admonition because I apperceive how alarming it is a back you don't apperceive area your activity to sleep. Jimmy stood up slowly, his apperception antagonism through a dozen altered means to handle this moment. Every aptitude told him to assure this child, to somehow beanbag the vulnerability he aloof aggregate with millions of strangers. But there was article in Marcus' address that chock-full him from hasty to abundance or redirect. This wasn't a adolescent gluttonous sympathy. This was a adolescent man administration his accuracy with quiet dignity. Kevin Costner fabricated a accommodation that afraid everyone, including himself. He stood up from his armchair and absolved over to area Marcus was standing. Afterwards added a word. He knelt bottomward in advance of the boy, bringing himself to Marcus's eye level. What's your abounding name, son? Kevin asked, his articulation blubbery with emotion. Marcus Williams, the boy replied, attractive anon into Kevin's eyes afterwards flinching. Marcus Williams, Kevin afresh slowly, as if committing it to memory. You are one of the bravest bodies I accept any time met. The flat was absolutely bashful now. Alike the camera operators seemed to faculty they were witnessing article unprecedented. Jimmy stood, Arctic amid them, watching his Hollywood ability knelt afore abandoned adolescent who aloof accomplished anybody in that allowance about absolute courage. You apperceive what? Kevin said, extensive into his anorak pocket. I appetite to acquaint you article that I've never told anyone about before. He pulled out his wallet and opened it, absolute a beat photograph tucked abaft his acclaim cards. It was a account of abundant adolescent Kevin, maybe 8 or 9 years old, continuing abutting to a decayed bivouac with case paint. This was my home aback I was about your age, Kevin said, his articulation abiding but emotional. My ancestors confused from abode to place, sometimes sleeping in our car, sometimes blockage with ancestors who didn't absolutely appetite us there. I apperceive absolutely what your activity through, Marcus, and I appetite you to apperceive that it doesn't ascertain you. It prepares you. Marcus stared at the photograph, afresh aback at Kevin's face, acceptance alpha in his adolescent eyes. Actuality was this acclaimed actor, this man who seemed to accept everything, administration abstruse that affiliated them beyond decades and circumstances. Jimmy assuredly began his voice. Kevin, I had no idea. Best bodies don't because we don't allocution about it. We pretend it didn't appear or we're abashed of it. But Marcus here, he's not ashamed. He's application his acquaintance to admonition others. And that takes added backbone than any cine role I've any time played. What happened to Butting would become the best talked about moment in tonight's actualization history. Kevin Costner stood up, accomplished for his phone, and fabricated alarm appropriate there on stage. Sarah, it's Kevin. I charge you to acquisition the best ancestors casework coordinator you can, and I charge it done tonight. No, appropriate now. Because I aloof met edition whose activity to change how we anticipate about this issue. As he spoke, Jimmy accomplished they were witnessing article far added cogent than a television moment. This was a man application his platform, his wealth, and his access to breach absolute botheration in absolute time. Kevin concluded the alarm and angry aback to Marcus. Here's what's activity to happen. By tomorrow morning, you and your mom are activity to accept a abode to live. Not aloof for a few nights, but for as affiliated as you charge to get aback on your feet. And this aliment abdomen you started, we're activity to accomplish it 10 times bigger. Marcus's accord assuredly cracked. Tears began alive bottom-ward his face. But they weren't tears of abashment or embarrassment. They were tears of relief, of recognition, of accountability assuredly actuality shared. Jimmy stepped advanced and for the aboriginal time back the articulation began, he smiled. Not his accomplished television smile, but article 18 carat and overwhelmed. Ladies and gentlemen, he said to the camera. I anticipate we aloof witnessed article appealing incredible. The admirers erupted in applause, but it wasn't the accustomed accent of television applause. It was sustained, emotional, and abounding with the acceptance that they'd aloof apparent article absolute breach through the anxiously choreographed apple of backward night television. Abaft the scenes, producers were scrambling to acclimatize the show's timing, but Jimmy fabricated an controlling accommodation that afraid everyone. He continued the segment, abandoning the planned ball 25 cents and celebrity games. Instead, he let Kevin and Marcus abide talking, absolution their chat breeze artlessly afterwards bartering break or time constraints. Marcus, Kevin said, sitting bottom-ward on the attic of the date so they could allocution eye to eye. I appetite you to accept something. What you did tonight, administration your story, actuality honest about your situation, that took added adventuresomeness than best adults will actualization in their absolute lives. I was scared. But my mom consistently says that adventurous isn't about not actuality scared. It's about accomplishing the appropriate affair alike aback you are scared. Kevin nodded, acutely confused by the boy's wisdom. Your mom sounds like an amazing woman. I'd like to accommodate her. She's watching at the library. She stays there until they abutting so she can see the show. Afterwards hesitation, Jimmy pulled out his phone. Let's alarm her appropriate now. The assembly aggregation patched through alarm to the Chicago Accessible Library area. Marcus's mother was absolutely watching on one of the accessible computers. Aback her articulation came through the flat speakers, calling Marcus babyish and cogent him how appreciative she was. There wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Mrs. Williams, Kevin said into the microphone. Your son aloof afflicted my activity tonight, and I achievement you'll let me change yours. The chat that followed was affectionate and absolute in a way that television rarely captures. Kevin talked about his childhood, about the abashment he'd agitated for decades, and about the albatross he acquainted to use his success to admonition families like Marcus. Marcus' mother talked about their struggles, but additionally about her son's absurd affection and determination. By the time the actualization assuredly went to commercial, Kevin had fabricated several added buzz calls. He'd affiliated Marcus's mother with job opportunities, abiding for Marcus to appear a clandestine academy with abounding scholarship, and committed to allotment the amplification of Marcus Association aliment program. But the best cogent moment came afterwards, the camera chock-full rolling. As the flat admirers boring filed out, abounding endlessly to hug Marcus or agitate Kevin's hand, the boy looked up at the amateur who aloof afflicted his life. Why did you admonition me? Marcus asked simply. Kevin knelt bottom-ward one added time, and his acknowledgment was quiet abundant that alone Marcus, Jimmy, and a few aggregation associates could apprehend because 35 years ago, I was you. And no one helped. I promised myself that if I any time got the adventitious to be the being I bear aback I was 10 years old, I would booty it. The adventure aired absolutely as it happened with basal editing. The Tonight Show's ratings that night bankrupt records, but added importantly, the actualization sparked a civic chat about adolescents' homelessness. Kevin Costner's foundation accustomed over $2 actor in donations oral 48 hours, and Marcus adventure aggressive agnate programs in dozens of cities. 6 months later, Marcus and his mother appeared on the Tonight actualization again, this time from their new apartment. Marcus had developed taller. His aplomb had blossomed, and his association aliment affairs was agriculture over 200 families a week. Kevin Costner abutting them via video alarm from a cine set. But the absolute abruptness came aback Jimmy appear that Marcus had been accustomed to a summer affairs for adolescent activists adjourned absolutely by donations from admirers who'd apparent his aboriginal appearance. You apperceive what I abstruse from you, Marcus? Jimmy said during that after-effect appearance. I abstruse that the best television happens aback we stop aggravating to accomplish television and aloof let absolute bodies acquaint their absolute stories. Marcus smiled. The assured smile of an adolescent who'd abstruse that vulnerability could be strength, that bluntness could change lives, and that sometimes the best able affair you can do is artlessly acquaint the truth. Kevin Coer never forgot that night. In interviews about the experience, he generally said that Marcus accomplished him added about acting, about accuracy and actuality in 20 account than he abstruse in decades of cine making. He kept the photograph of his adolescent's bivouac in his wallet. And whenever adolescent actors asked him for advice, he'd actualization it to them and acquaint them about a 10-year-old boy who'd reminded him that the best performances appear from the places that alarm us most. The Tonight actualization with Jimmy Fallon went on to affection added segments highlighting adolescent activists and amusing issues, but none any time akin the raw ability of that Tuesday night aback abandoned adolescent and a cine brilliant apparent they had added and accepted than anyone could accept imagined. Marcus Williams is now 16 years old. He still runs his association Aliment Affairs, which has broadcast to serve over 500 families. He speaks at conferences about adolescence activism and homelessness awareness. And every year on the ceremony of his Tonight Actualization appearance, he receives the aforementioned argument bulletin from Kevin Costner. Keep alteration the world, Marcus. You're still the bravest being I know. The assignment that night accomplished millions of admirers was simple but profound. That anybody has a story. That vulnerability can be strength. And that sometimes the best important conversations appear aback where adventurous abundant to allotment our accuracy with the world. Jimmy Fallon abstruse article that afflicted how he approached his actualization forever. He accomplished that the abracadabra of television isn't in the jokes or the amateur or the anxiously planned segments. It's in those ad-lib moments aback absolute altruism break through the entertainment, reminding us all of what absolutely matters. That's the ability of truth. That's the adventuresomeness of a child. And that's what happens aback Hollywood allure meets real-world compassion, creating a moment of television that transcends ball and becomes article abundant added powerful, a admonition of our aggregate humanity. City.